They say that a woman's love is the closest thing to the divine on this earth, a love that gives without asking, a love that bleeds so that others may live. Amara was a woman of such love. She had beautiful cocoa-toned skin and a heart of pure gold. And when her billionaire husband Julian was fading away on a hospital bed, she didn't hesitate. She gave him half of her own liver, a piece of her very body, just to hear him breathe again. But the moment Julian's strength returned, his gratitude vanished. He looked at the woman who saved him, at her beautiful brown skin and her surgical scars, and he told her she was a reminder of his sickness. He divorced her, cast her into the shadows, and today he is standing at the altar with a mistress who never gave him a single drop of her blood. But what Julian doesn't know is that among his wedding guests sits a man who knows exactly what was cut out of Amara to make Julian whole. And he's about to speak a truth that will bring this billionaire to his knees. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back. I pray that every woman watching this is wrapped in a light so divine that no shadow of betrayal can ever touch her soul. May your sacrifices be honored and your kindness return to you 1,000 times stronger. You are the quiet heroes of this world, and you deserve a lifetime of dignity for the love you give so freely. If your heart respects women, please subscribe to our family so you never miss a story of justice. Like this video and write "Women deserve the world" in the comments to show your support. Let's begin our story. The ballroom smells like crushed roses and expensive champagne, sharp, sweet, and almost metallic in the back of Amara's throat. Crystal chandeliers hang low, scattering light across marble floors polished so perfectly they reflect the ceiling like a second sky. Every laugh echoes, every heel click sounds deliberate. Nothing here is accidental. Not the gold trim on the walls, not the string quartet breathing through violins near the altar, not the guest list curated like a private vault. Amara stands where the shadows thicken, near a column wrapped in white silk. She didn't choose the shadows. They chose her the moment she stepped inside. Her dress clings to her ribs, tight enough that every inhale reminds her it's there. Midnight blue, long sleeves, high neck, fabric chosen to hide what lives underneath. She presses her fingers lightly against her side, just beneath the curve of her waist. The scar answers, a slow pulse. Then another, like a memory knocking from the inside. She shifts her weight, easing the pressure, forcing her shoulders back. Tonight isn't about comfort. It's about standing, about not folding. Across the ballroom, Julian Vance stands at the altar. Perfectly tailored tuxedo, broad shoulders. The same profile that once hovered over her hospital bed, pale and shaking, whispering her name like it was the last word left in the world. Now his hair is neatly styled, his jaw sharp, his smile effortless, practiced, expensive. He looks carved instead of saved. Beside him, Chloe glows. That's the word people use when they don't want to look too closely. Her skin is porcelain smooth under the lights. Her dress is white in a way that almost hurts to stare at layers of silk and lace spilling around her like foam. Diamonds flash at her throat. Her fingers lace through Julian's arm as if she's claiming a prize. The guests lean forward in their seats, hungry for the moment. Amara stays still. She didn't come for revenge. That's what she told herself while standing in front of the mirror earlier, fastening the dress, tucking her hair behind her ears. She came because something inside her refused to let the story end without her present. 5 years ago, the room had smelled different. Bleach, plastic, cold air recycled through vents that never slept. Julian lay in a hospital bed, skin yellowed, eyes sunken. Machines hummed around him, steady and impatient. His fingers trembled when she held them. His voice cracked when the doctor explained the numbers again, how his liver was failing, how the list was long, how time wasn't on his side. She remembered the silence after. Not the quiet kind, the kind that presses against your chest until you have to say something just to breathe. "I'm a match," she'd said. The words left her mouth, before fear could catch them. The doctor blinked. Julian stared. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. Amara hadn't thought about the scar then, or the pain, or the nights that would follow, curled around a heating pad, teeth clenched, swallowing pills that tasted like chalk and regret. She thought about Julian breathing. She thought about mornings. She thought about a future where he lived. The violin music swells, pulling her back to the present. The priest clears his throat. Guests straighten. Phones discreetly lift. Julian squeezes Chloe's hand. She beams up at him, lips curved just enough to look soft. Amara's fingers curl tighter at her side. The scar throbs again, sharper this time, as if it recognizes the room, as if it knows where it is. After the surgery, Julian didn't look at her the same. She remembered waking up, groggy, mouth dry, pain blooming through her abdomen like fire under glass. Julian stood near the window, already stronger, color returning to his face. "You should rest," he'd said, not turning around. Later, when she tried to joke about the scar, about how they'd match now, his smile had twitched. "Don't make it a thing," he'd muttered. Recovery changed him. The donors' dinners stopped. The quiet gratitude disappeared. The mirror became his closest companion. He talked about image, about influence, about rooms she didn't belong in. One night, he said it without looking at her. "You're too plain for this life, Amara." Another night, after a gala she wasn't invited to, he said the rest. "And honestly, you're too dark." The memory still burns, low and steady. The priest's voice cuts through the ballroom. "If anyone here has reason to object to this union." A pause. The air tightens. Amara's breath catches, not because she plans to speak, but because her phone vibrates. Once. Short. Sharp. Her heart stutters. She doesn't look at the altar. She doesn't look at Julian. She lowers her gaze to her hand, trembling slightly as she pulls the phone from her clutch. The screen lights up. Hospital alert. Her vision blurs around the edges. The message is brief, clinical, cold. Patient Julian Vance, abnormal liver. Function detected. Immediate attention required. Her thumb hovers over the screen. Emergency contact. Her name. The scar pulses again, deeper now, like something waking up. The priest clears his throat, ready to continue. Julian smiles, unaware. Amara lifts her eyes slowly. The music fades just enough. The moment stretches. And for the first time since she walked into the ballroom, she wonders if she really came here by choice. As the priest opens his mouth to finish the vow, Amara's phone vibrates again. And this time, the alert isn't silent. The ballroom's air felt thicker now, heavy with the warmth of bodies pressed into tuxedos and gowns. The scent of roses mingled with the faint sting of spilled champagne, and somewhere near the dessert table, someone's perfume burned sharp against her nose. Amara's fingers tightened over the phone, nails biting into the leather clutch as if it were a lifeline. The light above her flickered slightly, refracting on the crystal chandeliers. She swallowed. The vibration of the alert still thumped against her chest, not the phone's pulse now, but her own heartbeat syncing with it, reminding her of nights she would never forget. Nights filled with monitors, the hiss of oxygen, the antiseptic taste that clung to her tongue, and Julian's shallow gasps as she prayed he would survive. 5 years ago, the world had narrowed to the sterile white of a hospital room. Julian lay small and fragile, on a bed she had practically begged the hospital to let her approach. His mother, hands pressed tight to her chest, eyes sharp and cold, whispered over and over like a mantra. "You have to promise. You mustn't tell him. Not a word. If anyone finds out, the image, it'll ruin everything." Amara had nodded. She had wanted to argue, to scream that gratitude was not something to be hidden, but she swallowed. She had loved him then, loved him so fiercely that she agreed to silence, agreed to let the world see Julian as the miracle man, untethered to her sacrifice, untethered to the part of her she had given him. Half of herself, all of herself, in a way No one would ever understand. Back in the present, Julian was laughing. His voice, smooth and confident, rolled over the champagne-scented air. The toast was flowing like honey, gilded and polished. He lifted his glass to the crowd, his jawline catching the light, teeth white and straight, words flowing from lips that had once begged for her presence in the quiet of a hospital night. He was the hero tonight, the self-made man, the miracle that everyone cheered for and everyone saw, except them, except her, except the scar and the months of nights she had spent healing from him. Amara could still see him afterward. She could see his eyes narrowing as she lingered too long, fragile and pale in recovery. He didn't see exhaustion. He didn't see pain. He saw less than nothing. The way he looked at her, disgust flaring in the corners of his gaze, like she had dirt on her skin and teeth. She had tried to smile, tried to make a joke about the scar. He didn't laugh. He had only muttered words that still burned her chest. "Don't make it a thing," he had said, turning away as if she were some shadow that could vanish with a shrug. That night, he had not thanked her. Not once. Gratitude was a foreign language in his vocabulary. He had taken life, and she had given it. And then he had walked out of the hospital room and into a world that didn't care about her, didn't see her, didn't remember the nights she had cried herself awake because he had survived, and she had almost died in the process. The clinking of glasses drew her back to the present. Julian laughed again, louder this time, leaning into Chloe with a possessive hand on her back. Everyone clapped, raising their glasses, and she felt invisible, even in the shadows she had chosen. She hated herself for wanting him to notice, for wanting the faintest recognition of what she had done. That wish had died long ago, but sometimes it whispered anyway, like a ghost she could not shake. Amara's gaze drifted over the crowd, landing on people who didn't matter, their faces blurred, their laughter sounded tinny. Then she saw him, Dr. Aris Thorne. He stood near the edge of the ballroom, tall and impeccably dressed, but it wasn't his clothes that caught her attention. It was the way he looked at Julian. Not admiration, not pride, not awe. Concern, raw and sharp, flickered across his features and didn't hide. His brows drew together, the lines around his mouth tightening. The faintest twitch of his jaw betrayed the tension in his shoulders. He had seen too much, known too much. And the weight of that knowledge pressed against the crisp fabric of his suit. Amara's chest went tight. Her fingers loosened around the phone. The alert had stopped vibrating, but her pulse hadn't. Something was happening here. Something no one else could see. Her mind drifted back to the surgery itself, the night she had signed the papers without thinking twice. Julian had been on the brink of death. Machines had beeped, monitors had screamed, and she had surrendered a part of herself, trusting him, loving him blindly. That trust had been met with contempt, and it had taken years for her not to flinch at his name. Yet, here she was, standing in the same room as him, feeling the scar throb, feeling the old ache in her ribs, and realizing that the world would never know the truth unless she herself let it breathe. The music swelled, carrying Julian's laughter across the marble floors. Chloe's hand on his arm was firm, possessive, smug. The guests mirrored their smiles, eyes sparkling with champagne-fueled delight. No one noticed the tension under the skin of that room, the silent storm hovering over one shadowed corner where Amara stood. She remembered her promise, the words she had spoken so willingly back then. "I won't tell him." Her lips had barely moved. The fear had been sharp, cutting across her throat. Now, she could feel the irony like a blade at her side. The secret that had once bound her had grown heavier with every year. She had carried it quietly, invisibly, while Julian walked in glory. Dr. Thorne's gaze didn't leave Julian. It flickered once at her, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. Recognition, understanding, a warning, perhaps. She couldn't be certain, but she felt it in the pit of her stomach, the same place where the scar throbbed and whispered in memory. Something was about to break, and she wasn't sure who would shatter first, Julian or the world that had applauded him for surviving. She swallowed, tightening her grip on the clutch, letting her knuckles whiten. Every step toward the altar, every lift of a champagne flute, every glittering smile seemed like a challenge to the quiet storm inside her. And as Julian raised his glass once more, unaware of the observation burning through the crowd from Dr. Thorne, she realized the night had shifted, subtly, imperceptibly, but irrevocably. The secret she had carried for 5 years felt alive, dangerous, ready to surface, and she could no longer pretend it was just a memory. Every beat of her heart drummed in sync with the fear, the anger, the undeniable truth that her silence was fragile, that it could shatter in a single glance from the man who had watched her give life and then dismissed it as nothing. Amara's pulse picked up. The room, the lights, the laughter, it all receded, leaving only one constant, the silent weight of a truth no one here was prepared to face. Amara's eyes narrowed as Dr. Thorne took a single step forward through the crowd, his expression unreadable, but his intention clear. And she realized that tonight, the secret she had kept for Julian's image might finally slip from her grasp. The room seemed to tilt just slightly, a deceptive sway that made Amara's stomach clench. Julian laughed, a high, forced sound, lifting his glass too quickly, then caught himself on the edge of the table. The champagne sloshed, tiny bubbles reflecting the light like shards of glass, a sparkle too bright for what was happening underneath. His hand wavered. His eyes blinked too slowly. The yellow tinge in his skin glimmered under the chandeliers, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. Enough for Amara to notice without thinking, instinct alone pulling her attention. Chloe's hand flew up in irritation, fingers tapping Julian's arm, the sound sharp against the soft music. "Really?" she hissed, voice low but cutting, the kind of irritation that can slice through the thickest confidence. "Do you have to ruin my moment?" Her lips were tight, lipstick immaculate, a cruel little line of perfection. Every head in the room caught her glare, but nobody spoke. Nobody dared challenge the bride. Julian shrugged, too distracted, or maybe too stubborn, to respond. Amara's fingers tightened around the folds of her dress. Her pulse thrummed against her ribs in rhythm with the faint throb of her scar. The room smelled like waxed floors, sweat, and perfume, a cocktail that made her stomach sour. Her eyes tracked Julian as he laughed again, a little too loud, the sound hollow in a way no one else could hear. She had seen this before, moments like this. Moments when pride collided with fragility, when control masqueraded as strength. The strength, she knew, was borrowed. The thought hit her like ice. He hadn't taken his medication. Not today, not the past week, maybe longer. The anti-rejection drugs that kept his liver stable had been skipped, ignored, cast aside. And why? Because he wanted to feel powerful, whole, unbreakable, just in time to parade through Chloe's world of silk and caviar, champagne toasts and photo flashes, all while hiding a body teetering on the edge of betrayal, his own body betraying him silently, steadily. Amara's chest tightened. Every memory, every sleepless night, every hand over her side where the scar throbbed, pressed down like a hammer. Julian's smile faltered, tiny, almost invisible. He sipped from the glass, and the tremor of his hand betrayed the laughter. The guests didn't notice, or maybe they did, and they chose to ignore it. Human blindness. Or convenience. Amara recognized it instantly. She had watched nurses glance past dying patients when they didn't want to see the truth. She had learned the weight of silence, and now it pressed on her again, heavy, suffocating. The air shimmered with the tension of everyone waiting, unaware, wrapped in their own revelry. The heat of 1,000 bodies pressed against the walls, sticky and intimate. She could feel the thrum of the string quartet vibrating through the marble floor into her heels, the music clashing with the uneven rhythm of Julian's pulse. She could smell Chloe's perfume even from across the room now, a sharp floral scent that made her gag slightly, the sweetness masking something bitter underneath. Entitlement, manipulation, greed. Her eyes flicked to the guests, faces frozen in smiles that felt brittle. They didn't know. None of them knew the truth. Julian's perfect life, stitched together with white gloves and champagne flutes, was unraveling with each heartbeat. Amara's memory drifted, unbidden, back to the night after his first transplant. Julian lying in bed, skin pale, not yellow yet, his chest rising and falling unevenly, speaking her name like it was a prayer. He had survived because of her, because of what she had given, and he hadn't thanked her. He had walked out into the world of mirrors and accolades, leaving her behind. Now, the echo of that same negligence pressed against her ribs, familiar and unforgiving. The tip of Chloe's heels scraped the floor as she leaned closer to Julian, whispering, her voice a blade hidden in silk. "Hold it together. You promised me." Amara caught the faintest smirk, the way Chloe's lips twitched just enough to taste cruelty, satisfaction mingling with entitlement. The thought curdled in Amara's stomach. All of this, the laughter, the champagne, the lights, was built on deception. And Julian was willingly carrying it forward, ignoring his own fragility to sustain the illusion. Julian shifted, a small stumble toward the altar. A soft gasp rose from a table near the back. He steadied himself on the edge, gripping the marble so hard his knuckles whitened, and forced a laugh. The effort was transparent, weak, jagged. Amara felt it through the room, through her teeth, like a ripple across a pond. Weakness disguised as strength. She hated it. She hated him for it. And yet, for a fraction of a second, she felt that old reflex, the one that had made her stay up nights, feeding him, holding him, sacrificing herself so he could breathe, so he could live. Her mind reeled. If he collapsed here, the room would panic, of course, but it wouldn't change anything. The guests would gossip, take photos, whisper about the poor man. But nobody would see the truth. Nobody would see the silent cost of survival, the price that had already been paid. Only she could. Only she remembered the nights she had lain awake, ribs aching, body weak, whispering apologies into the sterile hum of a hospital ward because he had to live. And now, here, in the midst of this gilded celebration, she realized he was doing it again to himself. For what? Pride? Ego? Chloe? All three, probably. Amara's stomach knotted as she realized the quiet irony. He wanted to feel strong, untouchable, immortal even, for the honeymoon, for the image, for the applause. But he was ignoring the very thing that kept him alive. And when the body rebels, the masquerade ends in panic, not elegance. That knowledge burned hot inside her chest, mixing with the thrum of her scar, reminding her that strength taken for granted can be the first whisper of disaster. She could almost hear the faint rattle of his lungs beneath the laughter, the subtle unevenness of his breathing. Her head swiveled subtly, catching the edge of a movement near the grand staircase. A tall figure stepped forward, careful, precise, a presence that cut through the noise and the clinking of glasses. Dr. Aris Thorne. His eyes were locked on Julian, sharp, calculating, aware. Not a single laugh escaped him, no applause. Just focus. Just the weight of knowledge that few could carry. And Amara knew that look. She had seen it before, in operating rooms, in sterile lights, in moments when life and death balanced on the edge of a blade. Her breath caught. She could almost hear him thinking, measuring, calculating. And then, a whisper, urgent, low, pressed into the air between them. His eyes flicked to hers. Recognition. The words slithered across the space between them like smoke. "You're the donor, aren't you? You need to leave. He doesn't deserve the air you breathe." But he's about to crash. The world shifted. The music, the laughter, the sparkling lights, they all blurred around her, fading like a dream at dawn. She swallowed, heart hammering, mind spinning. Every instinct screamed, "Yes, yes, you need to move." But the old tether of responsibility twisted in her gut. She had saved him once. She had carried the cost. And now, standing in the shadows of his triumph, she realized she might have to act again or watch him fall in a way no one could blame but himself. Amara's fingers clutched the folds of her dress, the scar beneath burning sharp, insistently. The toast continued, voices raised in false joy, and Julian's grin remained, unaware of the truth that hovered close enough to shatter everything. Her heartbeat thundered. She had come for silence, for dignity, for observation, but now silence would no longer suffice. The first drop of poison was in motion, and the room, the life, the illusion, it could not withstand it. Dr. Thorne leaned closer, voice razor-thin, nearly brushing her ear, and hissed, "If you stay, he'll pay the price, and you'll pay too." Amara's breath caught, the scar pulsing hotter, as she realized that tonight, doing nothing was no longer an option. The room fell into a tense hush that seemed to stretch the chandeliers themselves. Julian's laugh had faltered a fraction before, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, and now it was gone entirely, replaced by that forced, carefully cultivated composure. "Doctor." Thorne's presence pressed through the crowd like gravity. He didn't just step through the ballroom. He demanded space without moving, carrying the kind of authority that made every whisper fade and every guest straighten, as if instinctively acknowledging danger. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the scar beneath her dress, as though it recognized him, recognized the weight of history, and pulsed sharply in protest. She had met Dr. Thorne once after the surgery, briefly, when she was still weak, and the hospital walls smelled of disinfectant and regret. He had a look in his eyes then, like he saw what no one else did. The truth, hidden in small details, the cost paid silently. She had felt relief and fear at the same time. Relief that someone knew, fear that someone like him could act. He stood, shoulders squared, suit impeccable, hands at his sides, eyes scanning Julian with a predator's precision. Julian smiled at him first, confident, assuming the man was just another guest, one of many toasting the miracle of Vance's recovery. But the way Thorne's jaw tightened, the subtle twitch of his lips, told a different story entirely. He had been in the operating room. He knew exactly what Julian owed, what he had taken, what he had spat on, and he had not forgiven. Amara felt a tremor in her fingers as they clenched her clutch. This was the man who had guided the surgery, who had coached her hand when she signed forms without thinking. He had watched Julian's body falter, seen the greed in his eyes when he took life for granted. And now, standing in the ballroom, he was about to speak a truth that would pierce through the illusions built on champagne and white silk. Julian straightened, sensing eyes on him, lifting his glass, smiling to regain control. Chloe leaned in, whispering words he ignored, brushing his arm with perfect nails. Guests murmured, some shifting uneasily, a few glancing toward Thorne with polite curiosity, unaware of the depth of the storm. Amara's stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment everything could break wide open. The music shifted slightly, violins holding a note just long enough to make the silence feel tangible. Thorne took a slow step forward, deliberate, letting the room adjust to him, letting them breathe in the weight of someone who had power beyond social standing or money. Eyes flicked to him. Some stiffened, some whispered to their neighbors. Julian's hand faltered at his glass again. For the first time, the room seemed smaller, the lights harsher, the air thicker. It wasn't the alcohol or the perfume, it was truth pressing in, undeniable and cutting. Amara's mind raced back to the surgery. The cold lights, the smell of antiseptic stinging her nose. Julian pale, fragile, slipping away with every monitor beep, his mother's hand over his mouth, telling her to keep silent. And Thorne, standing by, exuding control, silently glaring at Julian for every disrespectful word, every selfish thought he had allowed to cross his mind since she had given him life. That same glare now burned across the room, pointed at Julian like a blade sharpened on years of witnessed indifference. Julian cleared his throat. His voice came out tight, too high, lacking the confidence he had projected moments ago. Thank you all for being here. To celebrate. His eyes darted toward Thorn briefly, something like unease flickering across his features before he forced a laugh. It was hollow, a fragile shield that could not withstand the weight of the room's attention. Amara felt the scar pulse against her ribs, each heartbeat like a drum, counting down the seconds before collapse. She had carried this secret for 5 years, swallowed pride and pain alike, and now someone else held it in his hands, ready to reveal the cost, ready to lay it bare before everyone. Her breath caught. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't decide if she wanted him to stop or to go all the way. The tension coiled in her chest, sharp, relentless, undeniable. Thorn raised his hand, not in greeting, not in ceremony, but with an authority that silenced the room entirely. No clinking of glasses, no murmurs of gossip. Even the music seemed to pause, the violins holding a note that felt like it would fracture at any moment. He spoke, low, deliberate, each word slicing through the polished air. Julian Vance, the man they call a miracle. Julian's smile faltered completely now. A few guests shifted, uneasy. Chloe's lips parted in confusion, eyes narrowing, searching for the joke, the rehearsal, the staged compliment that usually followed any attention he received. There was none. Only Thorn. Only the truth, carried in the cadence of his words, weighted and unavoidable. Amara's stomach tightened, memories flickering like film through her mind. The night she signed the forms, Julian's shallow breaths as she held his hand. The thrill of saving a life shadowed by the realization that he would never see her sacrifice, never acknowledge it, never repay it. She had lived with that silence. She had tolerated it. But here, in this room, the silence was fracturing, like glass cracking under invisible pressure. And she knew this fracture could never be undone. Thorn's eyes locked with hers for a brief second, almost imperceptible, and a silent message passed between them. Recognition, understanding, warning. He knew, he had known all along. He had watched Julian take and discard, watch him ignore and betray, and now he was about to call it all out. The room seemed to pulse around her, every chandelier crystal trembling, every reflective surface capturing her taut expression, every whisper of silk a testament to the power Thorn carried without raising his voice. Julian shifted, sensing the tension, trying to redirect the room's focus. His laughter forced, high, brittle, a veneer over the unease prickling beneath his skin. He glanced at Chloe, seeking support. She gave him a small nod, lips tight. Her hand squeezed his arm, but the eyes of the room, no longer his allies. They were witnesses, witnesses to something he had ignored for too long. Amara's mind spiraled, the scar's pulse echoing the room's chaos. She could feel history colliding with present. 5 years of care, sacrifice, and rejection pressing against one moment, ready to explode. She could almost see it, like a shadow unraveling, the brittle mask Julian had spent years constructing, cracking in the glare of Thorn's attention. Thorn's hand lifted again, slow, deliberate, commanding silence. Every eye in the room followed the motion. Every breath caught, every heartbeat paused, suspended, waiting for what was coming next. Julian's chest rose and fell unevenly beneath the tuxedo. Chloe's composure faltered for the first time. Amara's stomach coiled, scar throbbing, sensing the reckoning poised at the tip of every word that would follow. Then, with calm precision, Thorn began to speak, voice carrying through the space like steel through glass, deliberate, unavoidable. Miracles aren't given by God alone. Julian. His words rolled across the room, measured, slicing through the false laughter, through the champagne bubbles, through the carefully cultivated masks. Sometimes they are cut out of the bodies of those who love us most. Too bad your body is currently rejecting the soul you tried to throw away. The room went still, frozen mid-laughter, mid-toast, mid-breath. Glasses hovered inches from lips. Guests blinked, some in confusion, some in horror. Chloe gasped, hand over her mouth. Julian's face drained of color, the bravado slipping through invisible cracks. Every muscle in his jaw twitched. Every polite smile he had maintained collapsed under the weight of the words. The illusion had ended. Amara felt the world tilt, the scar burning hot, a physical echo of the truth now spoken aloud. She had carried the secret, and now it was out. Not by her hand, but by the one person strong enough to cut through the veneer Julian hid behind. And in that moment, she understood. The real reckoning had begun. Julian's body trembled slightly, the first unmistakable sign of weakness. Chloe's eyes widened in terror, and Amara's pulse raced as Dr. Thorne's gaze pierced the room, unflinching, letting every guest see the truth she had been forced to carry silently for 5 years. The room froze for a heartbeat, then sound returned like a wave breaking over glass. Murmurs swelled into whispers, whispers into gasps, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses became insignificant against the rising storm of chaos. The chandeliers above flickered as if reacting to the tension, casting fractured light that splintered across the guests' faces. Every mirror and polished surface reflected shock, fear, disbelief, and fascination. Nobody could move fast enough, speak loud enough, or think clearly enough to contain the moment. The air was electric, tight, and suffocating. Chloe's hand shot to her mouth, sharp and manic. Her eyes widened, pupils stretching into dark orbs of panic. "He's lying!" she screamed, voice piercing, breaking through the collective murmur. "This is a lie! You're lying, Dr. Thorne. He's fine. He's healthy." Her heels scraped the marble as she pushed past a waiter with a silver tray, knocking a glass to the floor. It shattered, small, cruel shards embedding themselves in the pristine whiteness of the room. The fragrance of spilled champagne mixed with fear and perfume, intoxicating and nauseating. She was losing control, and the more she yelled, the more it became clear to everyone. Chloe's world of perfection was cracking. Julian's lips parted, forming a forced smile that trembled like a fragile paper sculpture in a storm. He tried to laugh, an attempt at charm, at control, at reassurance. "Everyone, it's fine. I'm fine, really," he said, his voice cracking, betraying the lie that his face desperately tried to hold. His legs trembled under the weight of his tuxedo, the elegant lines that had once made him untouchable, now a frail armor that betrayed him completely. He raised a hand, signaling the doctor away, but his body didn't obey. A sudden sway, a subtle wobble at first, then a collapse that made the room lurch with him. He reached for the edge of the cake table, the white tiers glossy and smooth, trying to anchor himself, trying to maintain the illusion of strength. His fingers tore into the icing, leaving deep grooves, white blending with red and yellow frosting in a violent, chaotic smear. The sound was shocking, the crunch, the sticky smear under his hands, the gasps from the crowd. The perfection of Chloe's carefully curated wedding crumbled in an instant. Amara didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the marble, echoing like gunfire in the stunned silence. The spotlight, perhaps noticing her movement, shifted, bathing her in warm light that made her skin glow like bronze, like something sculpted and alive, powerful and undeniable. Her hair cascaded around her shoulders, catching glimmers of light with each movement, her dress flowing in a way that made her presence both elegant and unstoppable. She looked nothing like the woman the world expected, soft, invisible, secondary. She looked like authority, like truth-walking, like consequence come alive. The whispers turned into a ripple that rolled through the room. Eyes followed her, some wide with awe, some narrowing in judgment, but all unavoidably drawn. The guests, frozen in the spectacle of Julian's collapse, watched her, realizing too late that the woman who had stood in shadows all these years had a presence that no chandelier, no socialite, no image could overpower. Julian groaned, trying to rise, but his legs failed him again. The panic flashed across his face, raw, unfiltered, the first real vulnerability anyone had seen outside the hospital's cold white walls. He had wanted to be untouchable tonight, to float above the crowd in power, beauty, and wealth. But the truth didn't respect vanity. His body had its own plans, and it was about to make them public. Chloe shrieked again, grabbing a nearby waiter, demanding him pulled away, demanding control that was already slipping through her fingers. She looked around, eyes darting wildly for some rescue, for someone to validate her world, someone to maintain the illusion. There was no one. The room was filled with witnesses, now people who had applauded, smiled, and whispered at Julian's supposed miracle. They were all watching. They could all see the cracks. The veneer had shattered. Amara's eyes swept over the panicked faces, feeling the weight of years condensed into this single, trembling moment. The scar under her dress throbbed in rhythm with her pulse, sharp and relentless, reminding her of nights spent in quiet suffering, nights spent giving of herself without acknowledgement, nights where the cost had been invisible. She had survived that pain. She had endured. And now she was standing in the center of it all, the one element of truth that no amount of champagne, silk, or social standing could obscure. Julian's voice faltered as he tried to speak. Words came out staccato, disjointed, incomplete. Amara. His eyes locked on hers, wide, frantic, uncomprehending. The room was holding its collective breath. The world he had built for appearances was cracking faster than he could process. Amara didn't move to comfort him. She didn't falter. She let the silence stretch for one heartbeat too long, forcing him, forcing everyone, to feel the weight of reality. She remembered everything, the sterile nights, the smell of antiseptic, the taste of chalky pills, the quiet, aching exhaustion while he slept peacefully after the transplant she had given him. The betrayal had been subtle, cruel, and all-consuming. Tonight, it would no longer remain hidden. The guests whispered among themselves, some in shock, some in awe. Their eyes shifted between Julian and Amara, the contrast undeniable. Here was the man who had taken everything for granted, collapsing under the weight of his own choices. And here was the woman, standing upright, glowing with the quiet strength that years of sacrifice had forged. She wasn't just present. She was a reckoning. Julian's mother clutched at her pearls, her face twisted in a mixture of horror and disbelief. She had orchestrated the silence, manipulated the image, protected the illusion. But even she couldn't stop what was happening now. The truth didn't need permission. It moved on its own. Chloe's expression twisted further, venom mixing with panic. She lunged forward, hands reaching for Julian, for the cake, for anything to reclaim control. But Amara moved. A step, then another, closing the space between the collapsing man and the crowd. Her presence alone seemed to command the chaos. No one stepped in front of her. None dared. Julian groaned again, rolling slightly on the cake's base. Frosting stuck to his suit, red and yellow streaking across white fabric. His mouth opened, a soundless gasp, as if he was only now realizing the consequences of ignoring the one thing that had kept him alive. The room recoiled in collective horror and fascination. Every head turned to see the spectacle, the failure of pride, the collapse of illusion. Amara's hands were at her sides, calm, almost regal, though every nerve in her body screamed with adrenaline. The scar throbbed, insistent, reminding her of the cost she had paid silently for years. Every eye in the room was on her, but she wasn't performing. She was simply being present, being truth incarnate, letting the world see what it had refused to acknowledge. Her voice finally cut through the chaos, soft at first, then gathering strength. "He didn't just take my heart." Her gaze swept the room, sharp, controlled, unwavering. He took my liver. The words landed like stones in the ballroom, reverberating, heavy, undeniable. And now, he's losing both. A hush fell again, different this time. Not the tense quiet before words, but a stunned silence of recognition. The room had absorbed the truth. There was no ignoring it, no spinning it, no sugarcoating it. The cost of Julian's arrogance, his vanity, his entitlement, had finally been made visible. Chloe's lips parted in a scream, but it was weak, fading against the weight of Amara's presence. Julian's chest heaved, weak, trembling, a body rebelling against choices that had once seemed inconsequential. Every guest now understood the stakes, not just the collapse of a man, but the unveiling of a story they had never known, one paid for in sacrifice, pain, and unacknowledged courage. Amara stood, bronze and untouchable, the living reckoning of years of betrayal, endurance, and silent strength. The music had stopped entirely, and even the chandeliers seemed to hold their light in awe. This wasn't just a collapse. This was the world being forced to reckon with the truth of what Julian had taken and what he had dismissed. The crowd froze as Amara stepped closer, voice steady and cutting through every murmured gasp. He didn't just take my heart, he took my liver. And now, he's losing both. The air tightened, eyes darted, jaws clenched, and in that suspended moment, everyone understood. The story had changed forever, and no one could look away. The siren cut through the night like a jagged blade, drowning out the remnants of the shocked whispers and gasps from the ballroom. Amara gripped the edge of the ambulance seat, her knuckles pale against the leather, the throb of her scar a constant reminder of the price she had already paid. Julian lay on the stretcher, pale, trembling, the once pristine tuxedo now stained and crumpled, a grotesque mix of red and yellow frosting clinging to his sleeve. His chest rose and fell unevenly, ragged breaths piercing the hum of the ambulance engine. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Chloe's voice came from the open doors, high-pitched and insistent, dripping with entitlement. "I can't go in there. I told you, I can't handle the smell of hospitals. I don't do sick." Her hand fluttered toward her face, as if to shield herself from the reality, her designer clutch dangling like an afterthought. She looked around for backup, for someone to validate her discomfort, but the paramedics were professional, indifferent, and Amara knew she wouldn't be coming. Chloe had already chosen herself over the man who had once been her world. Amara didn't flinch. She slid her hands under Julian's arms, steadying him with practiced care, the smell of antiseptic from the ambulance, mixing with the faint trace of cake, perfume, and fear. Every second counted, and she could feel the weight of the world pressing down with each bump along the road. Julian's lips trembled, a low groan escaping him as his eyes fluttered half-closed, then opened to land on hers. For a moment, time slowed. She could see the disbelief etched across his features, the panic, the shame, and the realization that his carefully constructed facade of invincibility had shattered. And there she was, the woman he had once discarded, the one whose life he had taken for granted, standing as the last tether to survival. "You're here," he whispered, voice weak, fragile, almost childlike. His hand reached out, quivering, fingers barely brushing her sleeve. "You're the one. You're my match. Amara, please." The words were desperate, raw, unpolished, stripped of pride. Amara felt the thrum of her scar like a second heartbeat, sharp and insistent. Every nerve in her body screamed, warning her that the cost of helping again could be catastrophic. And yet, the instinct to protect, to save, had been wired into her since the moment she had given him half of herself years ago. She knew what she had done then. She knew what it had cost. And she knew what he wanted now. Julian's eyes filled with tears, unashamed, unrestrained. "Give me the other half. Please, I'll buy you anything. I'll..." His words faltered, the tremor in his lips betraying his desperation. Every syllable, every plea was a knife twisting in her chest. He was begging not for her love, not for gratitude, not even for forgiveness, just for survival. Amara's throat tightened. She swallowed hard against the bile rising in her mouth, the memory of nights spent in quiet exhaustion flashing through her mind. Nights of waiting, of pain, of silent endurance, while he slept peacefully, taking life as his right, without a thought of the cost. She had been invisible then, a shadow, a donor whose sacrifice had gone unacknowledged, and now he wanted more, as if her body existed solely for his convenience. The doors of the ER slid open with a sharp hiss, bright fluorescent lights cutting into the dim ambulance interior. The smell of antiseptic and disinfectant was overpowering, mingling with the metallic tang of blood still clinging to his sleeves. Nurses rushed forward, calm but hurried, their presence professional yet tense. Amara felt the weight of the room pressing down on her chest, her pulse hammering in rhythm with Julian's uneven heartbeat. He groaned again, trying to lift his head, eyes darting to the bright lights, the bustling staff, and finally landing back on hers. "Amara, I can't do this without you. You're the only one. You're the only one who can." His voice cracked, choking on words. Fear overtaking pride, desperation spilling over like a dam breaking. Amara knelt beside him, careful not to touch the bruised pride that still lingered, but firm, grounding herself in reality. "Julian, you made choices," she said softly, each word deliberate, heavy with the weight of memory and consequence. "You've ignored your health, ignored the risks. Now you're paying for it." Julian's hand reached for hers, trembling. "I'll do anything. Anything. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, power, anything. Just don't let me die. Not now. Not like this." His eyes, wide and pleading, searched her face for a miracle, for absolution, for a lifeline. Amara shook her head, subtle, almost imperceptible. Her scar pulsed again, sharp, as if reminding her that she was human too, fragile and finite, despite what she had already given. The ambulance's hum seemed distant now, the world narrowed to the sterile lights, the smell of antiseptic, the weight of his gaze, and the undeniable truth of his reckoning. A nurse called out instructions to the team, and Amara stepped aside, letting professionals move, but remaining close. Every movement was precise, measured, as she observed the monitors, the IV lines, the oxygen mask, Julian's body rebelling against his own neglect. Her chest ached, not for him, but for what he had taken from her and from himself. Julian whispered her name again, softer this time, guilt laced with terror. "Please, Amara, don't let me die." His vulnerability shattered the room. The nurse's hands moved quickly, checking vitals, calling for orders. But Amara noticed it, the hesitation, the flicker of doubt on the staff's faces, the legal weight of what they could and could not do. Her stomach turned cold. The scar beneath her dress throbbed violently. The hospital lights seemed harsher now, clinical and unfeeling. The smell of antiseptic burned in her nostrils. She realized then the cruel irony. The very system designed to save life had rules, forms, and limitations. Limitations she had never considered when she had given half of herself 5 years ago. She had acted on instinct, love, and duty. Now, even instinct would not suffice. A door swung open sharply, and the head nurse stepped inside, face grim, eyes hard. The air seemed to freeze for a moment as her gaze swept the room, finally landing on Amara. Her voice was low but carried across the tense space, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "There's a problem," the nurse said, voice steady but heavy. "Julian's mother forged the legal papers for the first transplant. Amara, you were never supposed to give that much. Doing it again will kill you." The words landed like a hammer, shattering the fragile equilibrium of the room. Amara's heart skipped, her pulse rattling through her veins. Years of sacrifice, years of pain, all condensed into one impossible truth. Saving him again could end her. Her chest tightened, and she could feel the heat of the scar under her ribs, sharp, insistent, warning her that her limits had a cost she hadn't fully considered. Julian's eyes widened, confusion, terror, and panic blending into a raw, exposed look. What? What do you mean? I need you." His voice faltered, broken, small, desperate. Amara's fingers clenched against the edge of the gurney. She looked down at him, the man who had taken so much, who had demanded so much, who had never truly seen her sacrifice. And now he was begging. He was powerless. And she had a choice: save him again, risking everything, or finally let him face the consequences of his own reckless pride. The monitors beeped steadily, every sound a cruel reminder of the fragility of life. Amara felt herself trembling, torn between instinct and reason, love and survival, anger and responsibility. Julian's voice cracked through the tense silence. "Amara, please. I'll do anything." The nurse stepped closer, her eyes locked on Amara. "If you give again, you won't survive. He's asking for more than you can give. And this time, there's no undoing it." Amara's pulse thundered in her ears as she stared down at the man who had once been her world, realizing that saving him again could very well mean losing herself. The sterile hum of the hospital waiting room pressed against Amara's eardrums. The faint scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint floral perfume that Chloe had chosen with precision. A scent meant to be memorable, commanding, superior. Amara stepped quietly past rows of hard, plastic chairs and tired relatives, her eyes narrowing as she spotted Chloe across the room. She wasn't kneeling in anxious prayer, hands clasped in supplication, or biting her lip in worry. No, Chloe was sprawled comfortably in a leather chair, legs crossed elegantly, phone in hand, speaking in calm, measured tones to someone Amara didn't immediately recognize. A lawyer. Amara froze for a heartbeat, sensing the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. The soft echo of Chloe's laughter hit her ears, casual, cruel, deliberate. She wasn't concerned. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't even pretending. The reality struck Amara like a cold blade. Chloe was plotting, scheming, and calculating, while Julian's life hung by the thinnest of threads. Her stomach tightened, scar throbbing under her ribs, as if it remembered every sleepless night, every ache, every whispered warning she had swallowed silently. She crouched slightly behind a pillar, phone pressed discreetly in her hand, capturing the conversation. Every word Chloe spoke was laced with entitlement and calculation, a deliberate unraveling of morality, a testament to her true nature. Yes, I know the exact figures. Trust me," Chloe said, voice smooth, almost casual, as if discussing a casual purchase rather than a man's life. "If he doesn't make it, it's perfect. Everything will transfer seamlessly, all of it. The accounts, the trusts, the properties, billions. I've been patient, but I've waited for this moment, my entire life." Amara's pulse quickened, and the scar pulsed sharply against her ribs. 5 years of pain, sacrifice, and silent endurance seemed to converge in this room, in this moment. She had given him life once, and now, she realized with cold clarity, the woman he had chosen over her had plotted for him to die slowly, deliberately, neglecting medication, trusting in Julian's vanity, hoping for his weakness to serve her greed. Chloe's eyes flicked to a framed photo on the table of Julian, smiling at their wedding, and she sighed softly, almost reverently. "He looks so helpless when he's not in control," she whispered into the phone, tilting her head, lips curling into a subtle, satisfied smirk. "It's perfect. I'll make sure everything is finalized. If he survives, well, he'll be bankrupt anyway, and that's fine. I get what I want either way." Amara's hands clenched around her phone. Her knuckles whitened, Not from fear, but from rage, from betrayal, from the suffocating realization that this woman had orchestrated months, possibly years, of manipulation. Her teeth ground together as she recorded every syllable, every laugh, every gleam of malice in Chloe's eyes. The sound of her own pulse filled her ears as adrenaline surged, sharp and potent. Chloe leaned back, stretching elegantly, hair cascading over her shoulders like a carefully curated waterfall of light and status. She had created the perfect mask of refinement, but Amara saw past it, past the designer dress, past the polished nails, past the rehearsed smile. Beneath it lay calculation, greed, and cruelty. Every ounce of charm was a weapon, every laugh a trap, every gesture a claim on what was not hers to take. Amara's mind raced, considering her options. She could confront her, but the setting demanded caution. She could alert the medical staff, but would they understand the stakes, or would they write it off as drama from a distraught ex? Recording was her shield, her evidence, the only way to hold Chloe accountable without letting Julian's fragile state be used as a weapon against her. Chloe's voice softened slightly, conspiratorial now, like she had a secret she was dying to share. I told him to take it easy on the meds. He always thinks he's stronger than he is. Can't help himself, she said, tilting her head back, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. If he had just listened, well, we wouldn't be having these last-minute worries, but sometimes patience is the best tool. Amara felt bile rise in her throat. Her hands trembled, fingers hovering over the record button, making sure it had captured every deceitful syllable. The scar along her side burned fiercely, a visceral reminder of the literal half of herself she had given him, the silent nights spent recovering, the invisible agony of watching him take life for granted. And here was the woman he had chosen, scheming for the moment he might not survive, while enjoying every second of her own calculated advantage. Chloe leaned forward, one hand draping languidly across the arm of the chair, her posture relaxed, poised, and predatory. "Yes, I know what I'm doing," she said quietly, almost to herself, before glancing again at the phone in her hand, checking details, dates, clauses in Julian's will. If he dies, fine. If he survives, I've got everything under control. It's all going exactly as I planned. Amara's heartbeat thrummed in her ears. Rage and disgust collided with the urgency that Julian's life demanded. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to act, but she knew timing was everything. Confronting Chloe prematurely could provoke her into destroying evidence or accelerating her plan. She had to be strategic, deliberate, surgical, like she had been during the surgery years ago. And then it happened. Chloe's head lifted, and her eyes met Amara's. The recognition was instant, a sharp spark of malice and defiance. Her lips curled into a sneer, a slow, cruel smile that made Amara's blood run cold. Well, if it isn't the donor herself," Chloe said, her voice smooth but edged with venom. "I should have guessed you'd be lurking somewhere, keeping an eye on him, protecting him, dying for him." As always, Amara's breath caught, pulse accelerating, but she didn't flinch. She raised her phone subtly, recording every nuance, every malicious glint in Chloe's eyes. The audacity, the arrogance, the utter lack of humanity in the woman was palpable, a poison Amara could almost feel in the air between them. Chloe laughed softly, a deliberate, cutting sound. "Go ahead. Save him," she said, tilting her head back, eyes cold and cruel. "Die for him again if you want. I'll just enjoy his money with someone else. You know, it's exactly what I deserve." Amara's hands tightened around the phone. Rage, grief, and disbelief fused into a sharpened clarity. She had given him life once, she had sacrificed everything, and now she realized fully the depth of Chloe's manipulation, the deliberate, cold-hearted orchestration of a man's downfall for personal gain. Every step Chloe had taken was calculated, every smile rehearsed, every word designed to ensure she came out on top. The waiting room seemed to shrink around them, the fluorescent lights harsh, the faint beeping of distant monitors echoing like a drumbeat in Amara's head. Every witness in the hospital had been replaced by the vivid, intimate confrontation between the two women. One, the past, the life-giving force. The other, the parasite, calculating and unapologetic, holding the threat of destruction in her perfectly manicured hands. Amara felt the weight of history settle heavily across her shoulders. Every moment she had endured the silent suffering, the exhaustion, the betrayal had led to this confrontation. And yet, the stakes were higher than ever. Julian's life hung by a thread, and Chloe's machinations had now placed him and Amara in a dangerous, combustible triangle. The room was heavy with tension, thick with anticipation. Amara's mind raced through possibilities, strategies, contingencies. Could she expose Chloe now? Could she protect Julian without risking herself? Could she finally reclaim control over a situation where she had always been the silent victim? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain. This woman had revealed her true colors, and Amara had the evidence to prove it. Chloe's eyes never left hers, sharp, calculating, unrepentant. "Do what you have to do," she whispered, voice low, deliberate, venom dripping from every syllable. "But remember, I'm already ahead. You can save him, fight, risk. I don't care. Either way, I win." Amara's jaw tightened. The scar throbbed beneath her ribs, a sharp reminder that she had survived worse. She had endured, she had fought, and now, for the first time, she had the chance to turn the tables. But the danger was immediate, tangible, and lethal. Chloe's lips curled into a final sneer, eyes glinting with malice. "Go ahead, save him, die for him. I'll just enjoy his money with someone else." Amara's pulse thundered as she raised her phone, knowing the recording might be the only thing standing between justice and Chloe's manipulation, yet realizing the confrontation was only beginning. The door to Julian's hospital room creaked softly as Amara entered, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with the faint, metallic tang of blood. The faint hum of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen punctuated the tension that clung to the room. Julian lay in the bed, sheets pulled tight around his frail frame, sweat beading on his brow. His chest rose unevenly, each breath shallow, betraying the desperation in his veins. He looked at her with wide, pleading eyes, as if seeing her for the first time and realizing that he was nothing without her. Amara's heels clicked softly against the linoleum floor. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Every step was deliberate, a measured assertion of presence, of control. Her scar throbbed beneath her dress, reminding her of the literal cost she had already paid, but she ignored it. She had survived worse, and she would survive this confrontation too. Julian's voice broke before words could form fully. "Amara, please, I need you. I can't without you." His hands fumbled, reaching out, grasping at sheets and the thin air between them. His pride, once polished and untouchable, lay shattered alongside his body. Amara pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen illuminating her face with a cold glow. "Watch," she said, voice calm, steady, deliberate. Julian's eyes flicked to the phone, confusion and fear mingling in equal measure. Amara pressed play. Chloe's voice filled the room, soft, deliberate, calculating every syllable, dripping with greed and malice. Julian's eyes widened, the color draining from his face as he realized the magnitude of the betrayal. "No, no, this can't be," he whispered, voice cracking. She wouldn't, she... His hands clawed at the sheets, trembling. The luxury, the power, the empire he had built in his mind, dissolved in the stark reality of evidence. Chloe's plot had been deliberate, cold, and malicious. Amara watched him closely, every twitch of muscle, every falter of breath, every shard of panic etched on his face. She remembered the nights he had slept, untroubled, while she had endured pain and exhaustion after giving him half of herself. The betrayal now wasn't abstract. It was visible, undeniable, and it coursed through the room like electricity. Julian's eyes darted between her and the phone, desperation escalating into panic. I didn't know, he said, voice small, fragile, terrified. I thought I trusted her. His words collapsed into silence. He couldn't articulate the depth of his error, the reality that he had traded loyalty and life for glamour and ease. Amara's gaze hardened. She crouched slightly beside the bed, leaning just enough to meet his eyes, without conceding power. "You thought what you had was a diamond," she said softly, voice low but cutting. But it was glass, fragile, shiny maybe, but worthless when it mattered. Julian's chest heaved. Sweat beaded on his temple, dripping down the side of his face, tracing the furrows of panic and fear. I'll give you anything. My fortune, my empire, everything. Just save me, Amara. His hands trembled violently, reaching for hers, grasping the air as if he could physically pull her into submission, into compliance. Amara's pulse thrummed in her ears. She felt the weight of his desperation, the vulnerability that had been absent in their past, and the gravity of the choice before her. For years, she had been invisible, discarded, undervalued. Tonight, she wasn't invisible. Tonight, she wasn't a tool for him or anyone else. Tonight, she had the power to reclaim her agency, to assert herself, to demand respect, not because he offered it, but because she deserved it. Julian's voice became a trembling whisper. "Amara, please, I'll do anything. I'll sign anything, give anything. Just, please don't let me die." His body shook under the weight of illness and panic. His empire of wealth, status, and pride seemed meaningless now, a hollow shadow compared to the reality of mortality and betrayal. Amara lifted the phone, still recording, capturing not just Chloe's words, but the raw exposure of Julian's realization. "I see you now," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "I see what you've done, and I see who you thought you were. You traded loyalty for glamour, life for vanity, and the only person who truly saved you, you discarded." Julian's lips parted, trembling as he tried to speak. He had no defense, no argument, no charm left. All that remained was raw fear, raw regret, and the realization that he had been wrong. Disastrously, irreversibly wrong. Amara stood fully now, the light from the bedside monitor catching the highlights of her hair, the strength in her stance, the unwavering resolve in her eyes. The scar along her side burned sharply, a physical reminder of her survival, her resilience, and the power she now wielded. She had given him life once. She had endured his betrayal. And now, she would give him nothing until he recognized her worth, not as a spare part, not as a convenience, not as a tool for his survival. Julian's eyes filled with tears, unrestrained, as he reached toward her again. "Amara, I'll give you everything. You name it. Just..." His voice broke. Every word a plea, every syllable a confession. Amara didn't step closer. She didn't rush to comfort him. She let the silence stretch, letting the truth of the moment sink in. He had believed he could buy life, buy loyalty, buy forgiveness. But he had underestimated one thing: Amara's dignity, her autonomy, her refusal to be owned or controlled. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice low, deliberate, shaking only with the weight of all she had endured. "I didn't come here to save you, Julian. I came here to take back my dignity." Her eyes met his, piercing, unwavering. "I'm not a spare part. I am a woman." Julian's jaw tightened. Words failed him, swallowed by the enormity of her presence, her command, her unwavering assertion of self. He realized, too late, that wealth and status had never been what mattered. What mattered, the life she had given, the patience she had endured, the love she had silently offered, was something he had taken for granted and could never reclaim. Amara stepped back, subtly, letting him absorb the truth of her autonomy, the revelation that she would act only on her terms. The room, silent except for the soft hum of monitors, seemed to breathe with her, honoring the quiet power that radiated from her, a force that could not be ignored. Julian's desperation collided with reality, his panic sharpened by the knowledge that no amount of pleading, no promise, no fortune could undo the years he had taken for granted. He had been stripped of control, exposed in vulnerability, and confronted with the magnitude of what he had lost. The scar on Amara's side throbbed fiercely as she felt the surge of adrenaline, of triumph and pain entwined. She had endured, survived, and now stood fully, unapologetically herself. Julian's empire, his wealth, his manipulation, none of it could touch her. She was untouchable in her truth. She glanced at the recording still running in her hand. Chloe's words, Julian's reaction, the exposure of betrayal, everything was documented, undeniable. Amara didn't need his gratitude, his wealth, or his submission. She had what mattered, her agency, her dignity, her power, and the clarity of knowing she had survived and risen stronger. Julian's eyes followed hers, helpless, stripped bare, aware of his own folly and the strength he had ignored for years. He had begged, he had pleaded, he had offered everything, but none of it mattered anymore. The balance of power had shifted, and the truth was undeniable. Amara took a deep breath, the hum of the monitors syncing with her heartbeat, every nerve alive, every scar a reminder of her survival. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a tool. She was the author of her destiny, the force that would determine the outcome of this confrontation. Amara leaned in, voice low but razor-sharp. "I didn't come here to save you, Julian. I came to take back my dignity. I'm not a spare part. I am a woman." Julian's eyes widened, the weight of her words settling over him like a tidal wave, leaving him exposed, powerless, and utterly shattered. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room felt colder, harsher, as if the air itself weighed down on Amara's shoulders. Julian lay pale in the bed, monitors beeping rhythmically, each sound a cruel reminder of time slipping away. He looked at her with eyes that were no longer sharp and commanding, but wide, desperate, haunted. The vulnerability that had always been buried beneath arrogance now bared itself completely, raw and pleading. The attending physician, a lean man with grey streaks in his hair, stepped forward, voice clinical but carrying the weight of urgency. "We've located a new donor match. Anonymous, compatible. But it's not simple. There's a substantial financial obligation, plus legal clearance. It's complex." Julian's lips trembled. Then do it. Make it happen. Whatever it takes." His voice was low, strained, fragile. The arrogance of the boardroom and high-rises, the confidence of the billionaire, had crumbled into a whisper of fear. Amara's pulse quickened. She had seen desperation before, had endured Julian's demands and pleas, had held her own life in her hands once before to save him. But this time was different. This time she was aware of the stakes. The costs were no longer just physical. The payment required could bind her legally, financially, and morally. If she signed as guarantor, she would assume responsibility for his debt, his choices, his survival. She would be tethered to him in ways that could cost her freedom, her independence, the very dignity she had reclaimed. Julian's gaze landed on her, raw and pleading. "Amara, you have to, please, sign. You're the only one who can." His voice faltered, emotions spilling into panic. I can't wait years. Please, just help me." Amara felt a heat rise in her chest. Her scar pulsed sharply, as if reminding her of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every aching moment she had endured. She remembered the nights she had wept alone, recovering from giving half of herself to a man who had never truly seen her. She remembered the betrayal, the casual cruelty, the cold dismissal of her worth. Every fiber of her being screamed that she should walk away, that she owed herself more than another night tethered to him, to his desperation, to his mistakes. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear, the faint metallic tang of blood still lingering in the sheets. Julian's desperation pressed on her, tangible, almost suffocating. Every plea, every tremble of his hand, every falter in his breath pulled at her, a siren call to compassion and instinct. But Amara had changed. She was no longer the woman who gave blindly, who sacrificed without recognition, who tolerated betrayal in the name of love. She was measured now, calculating, aware. Every decision carried consequences, and she would not be manipulated again, not even by him. Julian leaned forward, eyes burning with urgency. "Amara, if you sign, you'll save me. You'll be my savior again. You're the only one." Amara's eyes swept across the room, catching the nurse's gaze, the subtle nods of the legal staff, the sterile instruments glinting under the harsh hospital lights. The risk was immense. If she signed, she bound herself to his debts, his failures, and potentially to a life she didn't want. If she refused, he would wait, possibly die, while the anonymous donor and bureaucratic delays stretched the wait interminably. The weight of the choice pressed down, heavier than the scar beneath her ribs, heavier than the years of sacrifice and betrayal. She could feel it in the taut muscles of her arms, the clenched jaw, the steady thrum of her pulse. It was more than life or death. It was autonomy, power, and the reclamation of self. Julian's voice broke her thoughts. "Please, don't make me wait. Don't." His hand reached for hers, trembling, desperate. The fingers barely brushed her own, a fragile connection charged with years of history, longing, and regret. Amara swallowed hard, feeling the room shrink around them, the monitor's beeps echoing like a drumbeat counting down time. Her mind raced, weighing consequences, calculating outcomes, measuring her limits. Her scar throbbed violently, a reminder that she had already paid a price no one else would ever understand. Then, from the doorway, a familiar sound, the soft, deliberate shuffle of shoes on linoleum. Julian's mother stepped in, eyes wide, voice quivering. "Amara, please, you must." She fell to her knees beside the bed, sobbing openly, wringing her hands. I was wrong. Everything. You have to save him." Amara's gaze hardened. She looked down at the woman who had coldly insisted she keep the original transplant a secret, who had manipulated paperwork, who had prioritized image over life. The sobs and kneeling felt hollow in comparison to the years of control and cruelty. Julian's mother reached out, trembling, clutching Amara's hand with a desperate grip. I'll do anything. I'll just sign. Please, he's all we have." Amara felt the weight of the world pressing down, her body tense, scar throbbing, mind spinning. The loneliness of her previous nights, the silent suffering, the invisible scars of betrayal, they all converged now. She realized that whatever decision she made would define not just his life, but her own. Julian watched her intently, sweat glistening on his pale forehead, every flicker of hope and fear exposed. He didn't understand that this was no longer about him. It was about Amara and the life she had endured to get here. She could feel the pulse of the room, the tension, the unspoken expectations pressing down. Nurses watched, legal advisors waited, Julian's mother cried, and the man she had once loved lay exposed in fear, trusting her to determine the outcome. Amara's hands tightened into fists at her sides. The scar burned sharper, a reminder of limits she had surpassed and might surpass again. She could save him, but at what cost? Her dignity, her freedom, her autonomy, everything she had fought to reclaim. Her mind replayed every betrayal, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. She remembered Julian's cold dismissal after her first act of heroism. She remembered Chloe's plotting, the laughter in the waiting room. She remembered the gnawing loneliness and the endless ache of being invisible, overlooked, undervalued, and now the choice was hers. To sign would be to step into a cage of debt, responsibility, and emotional leverage. To refuse would be to let fate take its course, possibly ending his life but reclaiming her agency, her autonomy, her right to live without being a tool in someone else's life. Julian's eyes met hers again, raw and pleading, desperation spilling over. "Amara, please, I need you. I can't do this without you." Amara drew a deep, measured breath, her chest tight, scar throbbing, mind racing. Every nerve in her body screamed both warning and resolve. She had endured enough to understand that life, power, and survival came at a cost, but she was done being a pawn. She would choose, on her terms, not for him, not for anyone else, but for herself. The room seemed suspended, frozen in time. Every sound, the beep of monitors, the low hum of ventilators, Julian's shallow breaths, the soft sobs of his mother echoed through her mind. The decision was monumental, impossible, and necessary. Julian's mother knelt at Amara's feet, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands clutching at Amara's legs. But Amara looked down at her own scar, a jagged, aching reminder of years of sacrifice and lonely nights, and whispered to herself, "Not this time, not for him, not for anyone else." The room held its breath, waiting for her choice, knowing that the life of the man before her and her own freedom hinged on the next move. The crisp January air carried a faint bite as Julian shuffled down Main Street, coat pulled tight around his frail frame. His steps were uneven, slow, deliberate, each footfall echoing a life stripped bare of wealth, status, and comfort. The once polished shoes, now scuffed and worn, dragged through puddles reflecting the dull grey sky. He had survived, yes, but survival was hollow when it came without fortune, influence, or the people who once worshipped at his feet. Julian paused outside the small stationery store, where he now worked as a clerk, the bell above the door jingling as customers came and went. He had spent a year learning the subtle art of humility, scanning receipts, organizing ledgers, and listening to complaints that weren't muffled by wealth or fear. The sound of a child laughing nearby made him flinch, a pang of nostalgia curling in his chest. He had once ruled the world, and now he was invisible to it. The wind carried a faint whiff of roasted coffee from the cafe across the street, mingling with the scent of wet pavement and melting snow. Julian rubbed his temples, feeling the sharp ache of his past mistakes pressing into the present. Chloe had long vanished. Her charm and affection evaporated the moment the money ran dry. Her absence was sharp, but no longer unbearable. Her betrayal had been another lesson carved deep into his conscience. He stepped back inside the store, arranging pens on the counter, staring blankly at the rows of notebooks. Life had slowed to a rhythm he had never known before, each day a repetition of tasks that required little strategy, little ego, little manipulation. He was free in some ways, yet trapped in a cage of his own making, a cage constructed from arrogance, pride, and the failure to see what truly mattered. And then, a flicker of color caught his eye, something out of place amid the monotony. A magazine display near the cashier's counter gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He walked closer, curious despite himself, and froze. The cover bore a photograph so vivid it seemed almost alive. Amara. She stood radiant, glowing, bronze skin catching the sunlight in the image, eyes bright and confident. Her hair framed her face in waves of perfection, lips curved in a gentle yet commanding smile. Next to her, Dr. Aris Thorne stood tall and composed, the corners of his mouth lifting in quiet pride. He was no longer just a distant figure of authority from the past. He was her partner in work, in life, and in every visible measure of triumph. The headline read, "Invisible Donors, Visible Impact, Amara's Foundation Changes Lives." Julian's breath hitched. The words blurred in his mind as images of past sacrifices, betrayals, and silent suffering washed over him. Amara had taken the quiet agony, the invisible scars, and transformed them into power. She had built an empire not of wealth, not of manipulation, but of compassion, courage, and reclamation. And she had thrived. He remembered the scar, not hers this time, but the emotional one he had inflicted upon her. Every plea she had ignored, every tear she had endured, every moment he had dismissed her worth it had fueled this ascent. She had turned betrayal into action, rejection into opportunity, and pain into an unshakable force. Julian ran a hand across the magazine, feeling the glossy texture beneath his fingers. He had once believed himself the master of all he surveyed, the king of a glittering empire built on wealth and appearances. Now, in the reflection of her triumph, he was nothing more than a shadow of his former self. His wealth had vanished, his power dissolved, and Chloe's absence left only the echo of his poor choices. The foundation she had built was monumental. Programs for organ donors, education, awareness, and support for those whose sacrifices were invisible to society. It bore her name, her vision, and her strength. The magazine article chronicled stories of lives saved, lives transformed, and families mended because she had chosen to rise above bitterness and wield her influence for good. Julian's heart clenched in a way that was both painful and enlightening. The wealth he had once offered her as a bribe for her compliance now seemed trivial, almost laughable. She had never needed his money to succeed. She had needed recognition, agency, and the freedom to channel her strength. And she had taken it, unapologetically, brilliantly. A pang of regret surged through him. The realization was brutal and raw. He had had life, power, and the loyalty of a woman willing to give everything for him, and he had squandered it. He had chosen vanity, status, and a woman who sought only his fortune over authenticity. And now, looking at her smiling face on the cover, he understood fully what he had lost. The streets outside bustled with life, children playing, couples walking arm in arm, the distant rumble of traffic, but Julian felt isolated, cocooned in the ache of recognition. Every decision he had made, every betrayal he had allowed, every lie he had tolerated, now coalesced into a singular truth. Amara had become the person he could never be, and he had nothing left to offer but acknowledgement. He remembered the scar under her dress, the physical reminder of the literal half of herself she had given him, and the silent nights of recovery, of longing, of invisibility. That scar had been a gift, a lifeline, and a metaphor for the endurance he had failed to honor. Every time he looked in the mirror, every time he counted the money he no longer had, every time he felt the absence of Chloe and the emptiness of his apartment, he would see the imprint of her sacrifice etched indelibly on his life. Julian dropped the magazine onto the counter, trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of his choices pressing on him, heavier than any ledger or balance sheet, heavier than the hollowed-out luxury he had once called life. Amara had risen, radiant and untouchable, while he had been left with the stark reality of his mistakes. He thought of Chloe, vanished and greedy, her betrayal now inconsequential, her presence irrelevant. Amara had created a world of impact, of meaning, of significance. Julian had survived, yes, but survival alone was hollow without purpose, without acknowledgement of the cost, without the woman who had made it possible. The memory of her words, whispered with fierce precision, echoed in his mind. "I'm not a spare part. I am a woman." Those words had become a manifesto, a declaration of autonomy, and now they were carved into the very fabric of his understanding. He had finally received what he had always lacked, clarity, but the clarity was painful, a mirror showing not just the woman he could never own, but the man he could never have been. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the small-town street outside the shop window, life moving forward around him while he lingered in regret. The snow had melted slightly in patches, puddles reflecting the pale afternoon sun. Children laughed, Strangers passed by, the mundane hum of life continuing, indifferent to his plight. Yet every sound, every reflection, every movement reminded him of one thing. Amara had become everything he could never be, and it was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly unreachable. His hands shook as he clutched the edge of the counter. He was alive, yes, but life without her influence, without her vision, without her presence, was hollow. He had health, but not the woman who had made that health possible. He had time, but not the right to claim it alongside her triumph. He had memories, but they were now sharp, cruel, and filled with loss. Julian sat down slowly, head in his hands, and stared at the magazine again. Amara's smile was radiant, her posture proud, her presence commanding. The world she had built sparkled with achievement, compassion, and power. And he was outside, a clerk in a small town, a man stripped bare of arrogance and pretense, confronted with the undeniable truth of what he had failed to cherish. The irony was not lost on him. He had finally regained his health, the life he had once taken for granted, and yet every glance in the mirror reminded him of the one piece of his existence he could never reclaim. She had given him life once, and now she had given herself a life he could never touch. Julian exhaled shakily, the breath heavy with realization. The world continued, indifferent to his regrets, unaltered by his pleas or longing. And somewhere out there, Amara, resilient, radiant, unstoppable, continued to rise, transform, and empower, leaving him to sit with the stark, unyielding weight of loss and recognition. Julian finally had his health back, but every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the piece of the woman he could never be man enough to keep.